Thank you.
So we wait for our next speaker. Who should be joining us very soon. Fantastic. So our next speaker is Deyatima Ghosh. She's from the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, India. And she's going to talk about if biological pest regulation can benefit from integrating predator cognition.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Abby.
You can share your screen and then the floor is yours.
Yeah. Is it, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So hi, everyone, and good morning, afternoon, and good evening across the time zones. So I'm Deyatima, and I work on animal cognition and its implication. So to begin with, what do we mean when we say cognition? It's basically the ability by which an animal can perceive whatever happens in the environment, can make informed decision, and finally can act on it. There are marvelous examples across taxa. For example, in the pepper wasps, they identify individuals from the black and yellow marks on the face and the abdomen. That determines their hierarchy in the social group. In zebrafishes, where they always prefer longer wavelengths over the shorter wavelengths. In frogs, in tadpole transporting males of the poison dart frog, where they can remember the deposition sites for almost 2 months, and they navigate using a cognition map. In reptiles, there is evidence of new thinking ability to solve novel tasks, which they have never performed before, and also reversal learning. In birds, there is evidence of contextual learning where they preferred red color, though it signifies warning coloration of the insects, yet they do prefer red color when it comes to context-specific situations, because that also signifies red fruit, ripe fruit in the forests. So the question is, can there be an implication of animal cognition? So what we have to understand here is an animal performs a function in its habitat to survive. But in the act of doing so, some of the outcomes give us benefit, but these are unintentional. One such example is when an organism in its attempt to reproduce or forage ends up reducing the abundance of harmful insects or crop pests, which we say as biological pest regulation. Now, since these animals inherently in their act of survival end up benefiting us, we refer to them as natural enemies. So my work, the goal of my work is to understand the cognition that these animals use to do what they do in their habitat, and how we can improve that or manipulate that to improve the benefits to us by improving their functioning. So is this a new thing? It isn't. So using biological pest regulation is an age-old practice which dates back almost 120 years. One example is in this case, the hysterid beetles. So they learn the chemical cues of these grain borers. The grain borers release aggregate pheromones for reproduction, for breeding. And these hysterids, they can understand the cue, follow it, which improves their ability to locate their prey. In case of parasitoid wasps, this is a fascinating example. This is an example of color preference. So they oviposit their eggs in Lepidopteran egg clutches. Now, lepidopterans are one of the most severe crop pests. And these parasitoids prefer yellow color because maybe it's predominant in their habitat. And most of the Lepidopteran egg clutches are also yellow in color. So they deposit the egg, and these parasitoid eggs develop at the cost of the eggs of the Lepidopterans, which means reducing the crop pests. Now, interesting is they can also discriminate between the color. They do not opt for those clutches which are darker in color or are black, because that signify that they're already parasitized or damaged. Now, we have been using this method since years, but we probably overlook the cognition which is involved. As a result, the uptake of this concept is lacking, and mostly so when it comes to the vertebrates. For the vertebrates, there are birds, mammals, and reptiles. Reptiles are much more interesting for me because they're generalists. So, which means they have a wider diversity of prey base. Most of the reptiles we find in the farmlands are insectivorous. They do have good cognitive skills, which until recently they were believed to be all instinctive creatures, but they actually are not. And they form a major part of the farmland biodiversity. So they basically check in all the boxes which are required to be a good bioregulator. And also in integrated pest management strategies, we need to incorporate more and more potential bioregulators to improve their overall pest regulation. So why not reptiles? So I look at reptile cognition and how that can improve pest regulation. For this talk, we'll be looking at two important cognition cues which improve their pest intake. The model for my study is Calotes versicolor because they're insectivores, they're generalists, opportunists, diurnal, sit-and-wait foragers, high fecundity rate. So the first two, diurnal and sit-and-wait, actually helped us to design the experimental plot, and they also do possess cognitive skills. So the big question is, can reptiles learn about a better foraging patch and how that impacts their prey intake? What did we do? This is a study site which is in Krishi Vigyana Kendra in Bangalore. This is how the study site looked like, and we converted a patch of this into a crop patch. So this is a schematic representation of a crop patch, which is divided into two foraging sites. One is rich and one is poor based on the density of the prey there. So we added prey in one patch and we did not add prey in the other. So this position of the rich and the poor patch was constant for each individual across a number of trials, but it was counterbalanced between individuals. We released the reptile and we recorded its behavior, which we later coded in a software called Boris. So what did we do? We first coded the correct choices made, and next we coded the time allotment between the two foraging patches, and finally how that impacts their pest intake. The results were, of course, intriguing. First, we found that the reptiles made a significantly more correct choice while they entered the foraging patch. And how quickly do they learn? You can see after the second trial, 70% of the lizards started revisiting the correct patch, rather entering the correct patch when we released them in the enclosure. How did they allot the time? They spent significantly more time in the rewarding patch than the non-rewarding patch. And this impacted their prey intake. So the pest intake from the rewarding patch was almost double than that of the prey intake. And correct choice made and the number of and the time allotment significantly impacted their pest regulation or their pest intake. Which means reptiles do learn. They can judge the quality of the foraging patches based on prey density. But what does that mean in a field? If I have a crop field which has got diversely infested crop patches, I can expect that over a few number of visits, my reptiles would be learning about which one is more infested, which means they would be spending more time in a pest-infested crop patch, eventually reducing the crop pest. Therefore, reptiles do serve as a potential bioregulator, even through the cognitive aspects. So why should we at all do this? So the graph on the left is from a recent study which shows the pesticide risk across the globe. Now the impact of pesticides is multifold. It's not just one. So it impacts the crop health. It of course damages all the beneficial biodiversity in and around farmland. That's a reason why recently most of the studies focus on conserving biodiversity beyond PAs and mostly in agricultural lands. They also destroy the crop health. And what we don't realize is they also disrupt the ecosystem services which comes free of cost from this beneficial biodiversity. One major drawback is after a few applications, the pests start developing pesticide resistance. So in that case scenario, if I know that my farmland biodiversity is cognitively capable of improving my pest regulation, my next step would be improve their prey specificity, so that overall my biological pest regulation is much better, it's improved, which means I'm relying more on my biodiversity rather than on chemical pesticide input, which eventually will improve the overall biodiversity again in and around farmland, which will contribute to biological pest regulation. So this is what I work on, and I'm almost towards the end of my talk, but I cannot wrap up without mentioning a few very important people. The study was approved by two ethical committees, one in A3 and one is University of Lincoln. And the health condition and the enclosure health was all monitored across the study period. So many thanks to Dr. Aditya, who has been an integral part of this work, without whom this wasn't possible. Dr. Arvind, who provided the logistic support for the fieldwork. Professor Wilkinson, with whom I conceived this idea, and our work got funded by RUFOD. Professor Libby for helping in refining the objectives. All the members of the GKVK Sec Lab for even volunteering and helping me out in my fieldwork. Professor Bhagyashree Shanbhag, who is the only person in India who has worked on cognition on Calotes. And the same Rajiv Raman, Professor Rajiv Raman, he works on temperature-dependent sex discrimination. And these two people have been extremely valuable for my work because they were very happy sharing their own experience, which helped me learn about my subject much more. And of course, a dear friend and a colleague, Arjun. During the fieldwork, I came across this brilliant young conservation biologist and ecologist who made fieldwork very, very, very fun. And of course, none of this was possible without our subjects, Grum, Gulliver, Gubby, Tiger, Spotty, Nun, Narvi, and Pirate. We named them based on their morphological features or personality. So this paper is, hopefully we'll be submitting this paper by the end of this month. And these are the authors. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to an exciting discussion session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deyatima. Great talk. We're still waiting for questions from the YouTube chat. But I guess in the meantime, I can ask a few. Really nice experiments where you had the two different conditions and you let the lizard in and sort of let them choose what to do. I was wondering if you had looked at the time delay to enter the correct patch as a function of trials. Like, do they, as the trial number increases, do they make the choice faster and faster? Is there some learning involved? Or?
Yes. So initially, when we left the lizards in the front of the enclosure, they took some time to decide. But again, this is also their biology. So these are ambush predators. So they actually look for the prey cue, the movement in the prey. But once they had this, from the second and third and fourth trial onwards, they were pretty fast. We just had to open the enclosure and they would simply run.
Okay. So yeah, okay. So they figured it out very fast.
Yes, they did. We did expect, but yes, they did.
Okay. I also was wondering, do you know what cues they are using to estimate the prey density? Is it, say, time to capture the next prey?
Excellent question. Yeah. No, sorry, please go ahead.
I was also wondering if it's possible, if you know what it is, if you can manipulate this experimentally and see what happens.
Yeah, so these are all the other objectives. So we also used certain cues like positional cues, altering the positions, probing them, and also some color cues to understand which cue they actually follow. But I'm not. So capturing rate, of course, and handling time is of course a cue. And it is understandable that where there is more prey, these variables are much lesser. Like the time for handling prey is much less. So probably that's a reason which determines whether they would stay in a patch or leave a patch. So that definitely is a cue. And of course, it was significantly different because we kept one density very high, 15 prey we added compared to the other where we did not add any prey at all. So yes, that is of course one of the cues.
There's one question from the chat. David asks, what happens when the predators are successful and they reduce the prey on the site? Do they start looking for new hunting grounds?
Interesting. So yes, they will. So once I'm done with the reacher patch, I, as a predator, have to move on. I need to look for other sites where I can also get food. So another part of this study is where we actually see their rate of exploration, the rate of switching between the prey, and how that varies with the pest. So yes, David, definitely. Once they are done reducing crop pests from one patch, we can expect them to move on because they have to feed. And if this crop patch is not rewarding, they wouldn't be spending much time or wasting their time, right?
Just to add on to that question a bit, do you think then the density, the prey density in a patch determines how long they wait before giving up? So if they're in a better patch, maybe they wait longer thinking that they might still get some prey, whereas in a poorer patch, they might give up and start exploring faster.
Yes, absolutely. Correct. So also what we noticed is, this also is another thing wherein the personality of the animal comes in. Also, if I know that the right patch for me, which I know already is rewarding, I know that there is enough food for me, I might want to go and explore as well. We did see this during our experiment. So it's not that simple a system. It's pretty complicated because, again, we are still exploring what these animals use to do what they do in the wild. But yeah, that of course is an option. Yeah.
There are a few comments on the YouTube chat thanking you and saying that was a very interesting talk. I think I don't see any more questions, so I'll ask one more maybe while we wait and see what happens. So in your last slide, I really like the schematic that you were putting together. You had a link going from biodiversity to predator cognition. So how are you envisioning this? In what context? Are you saying something on the lines that greater biodiversity should necessarily imply better cognition, or yeah, I was just wondering.
So the last slide was the whole idea of the work, that predator cognition can be an important component which we normally overlook. So more and more you include the predators, we do it like we have to increase the diversity. So it's mostly from an ecological perspective that we need to increase the diversity of this animal, but we don't know how they function in the wild. Once we know that, if in any ways I can improve their understanding of the situation, understanding of the conditions, I can actually start using lesser pesticide, which eventually improves my whole biodiversity, not just my group of reptiles, but birds, but amphibians, but many other organisms as well. And they all start contributing to the biological pest regulation system. Right, so it's no longer just restricted to one particular animal species or group, but rather an overall thing, which is actually the main aim for IPM.
Thank you. I think that is all the time we have. So thank you for giving this